Hi, my name is Konrad Putzier. I'm a reporter at The Real Deal, and I'm here today with Brad Hargreaves. Brad is the founder of Common, a co-living company that he founded in New York City in 2015. Brad, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Excited to be here.
So, you're in the co-living business, right?
Yes,
And
we
it
are.
sounds simple enough, but there's a lot of different opinions about what it is. So maybe, could you give us a definition of what you see as co-living?
Well, at the core, it's about taking the experience of living with roommates, removing all of the annoyances and challenges. Hundreds of thousands of people in New York City alone live with roommates. It's an incredibly common thing. And we're really taking the annoying parts out of it, but keeping the good parts. We clean everything in case you have a dirty roommate. We provide shared kitchen and bathroom supplies. You don't have to decide who goes out and buys those. We furnish everything. We split the bills for the residents. So it's just a better and higher quality way to live with other people.
So I guess you've made this pitch to many, many landlords, right? You've talked to probably most landlords in the city at this point. What are some of the more interesting reactions that you've gotten over the 2 odd years that you've been doing this?
Well, the reactions have changed over time. I think at the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism among real estate developers and investors that this is a way that people really lived, that anyone would want to live like this with other people.
Did you ever have anyone who just shut the door in your face and said, "Get out of here"?
Oh,
This
plenty
makes no sense.
plenty of times. Although we're generally, I think, pretty friendly people. So most people would at least listen to us before they told us that we were idiots. I think at the beginning it was a question of what is this? Why does anyone want to do this?
Yeah.
And then I think as there has been education over the past few years, larger players have gotten involved. Common has opened now 10 buildings. And I think that has moved the questions away from, does anyone want to do this? And into the really meaningful details of, okay, what does the return profile look like? How do I get financing for a co-living development? And frankly, those are a lot more interesting to have conversations about.
But if you think about it, the multifamily sector in New York City has been pretty profitable, right? Most landlords of rental buildings have lived pretty well, made good money over the years, and the market's doing okay, right? Despite weakness at the high end. How do you pitch to them that they should now take a risk and go with a company that's completely new and unproven, as opposed to just doing what's been working for decades?
Yeah, well, a couple of reasons. One is the returns. I mean, co-living buildings generally provide 100 to 200 basis points higher yield, laid out well, versus a well laid out traditional building. So there is a bump in returns.
So what would commonly be the yield on a normal walk-up rental building?
Let's say a walk-up rental building is trading at a 4.5 cap in a neighborhood, say a nice neighborhood in Brooklyn, like Williamsburg, Park Slope, something like that. As a co-living development, that would generally, generate 5.5 to, maybe even up to 6.5 in cash on cash unlevered yield. So there is if a building is laid out in the right way, there is a bump to NOI, to yield.
There's still plenty of skeptics of the co-living business model, and I'm going to read a quote to you that you know very well. So this is Ofer Yadeni, the CEO of Stonehenge Partners. He was at a panel a couple of months ago, and he said, I quote, "If you're a 35-year-old and you live in a WeLive or a Common, you're a loser. I'm sorry, but if you live with 10 people and you share breakfast or lunch, where do you go with your girlfriend?" So if Ofer Yadeni was sitting in this chair right now, what would you say to him? What would your response be?
Well, my response would really be to come out and see a common home. A lot of people have a misconception about what co-living is. The average common member, for instance, is 30 years old. They're a little bit further into their careers than a lot of people expect. I think a lot of people look at this and expect bunk beds, expect IKEA furniture, expect a bunch of 22-year-olds. And that's really not what it is at all. You come in, it feels really nice. It feels like a home. It feels like someplace you could live for a long time. And more than 70% of our members are actually on, 12 or more month leases. That's something a lot of people don't understand about co-living, is this is a long-term way to live. It's not transitory. It's not just for really young people. Many of us who have been in New York for a long time have been through those brutal processes finding a rental apartment. And I think there's a little bit of oh, well, if it's a good experience, if it's easy, if someone else is setting up your Wi-Fi, setting up your electric, setting up your cable, that's coddling. And I don't think that has to be the case. If you look across consumer products, and we look at Common as a consumer products company, a lot of different things have gotten easier. I get my groceries delivered. I book a doctor's appointment on an app. Like, so many things have gotten easier. Why is housing still hard?
So fundamentally, what's more important to Common? Is it more about the community? Is that kind of the central thing? Or is it really more about making housing easier, making it easier to just rent a furnished studio in Bowen Hill as opposed to living in a modern commune?
The convenience gets them in the door. The community keeps them there. So they really work at different places in the member's life cycle.
Still, though, at the beginning, all your apartments were shared, right? At your first units, if I understand this correctly. Now that you're expanding to bigger buildings, you're doing one bedrooms, you're doing studios. Is that kind of at least a partial shift away from this like community-centric business model towards a more broader business model that just serves?
Well, I don't think you have to share a kitchen to live in community. And we realized that one thing that we had gotten really good at was building community, was fostering community, getting people to know each other. And we had also built, I think, a really strong consumer brand and marketing channel around this idea of community and welcoming often newcomers to a city. And we are actually getting a lot of members who said, potential members, who said, I like this whole idea of Common. I like the idea of living in community, meeting other people, but I don't really want to share a kitchen. Or I have a dog, and we don't allow pets in co-living units. So we were losing a lot of potential members because of that. So we decided to expand the vision and to say, you know what, it is okay to have some more conventional studios, one bedrooms, alongside co-living, to just accommodate a broader swath of members, but community has to stay. We can't lose that.
Now, you make a living partnering with development companies,
Correct.
and the idea is development companies need you to provide this service. Property Markets Group, which is another real estate development company that's very active in New York City, they recently decided to just launch their own co-living business, and they're just going to do it themselves. And I talked to a developer recently who told me that he thinks that's the biggest risk to co-living companies, that developers who are cost conscious are just going to decide, why should I pay Common a fee if I can just do it myself? Why do they need Common to do this?
Well, a couple of things. Well, running co-living at scale is tricky. I mean, we have a team of 6 engineers just building software to help us do all the difficult things that need to be done on the back end to put people together on leases, for instance, to also make sure that we're fully compliant with all local laws and regulations. So that's actually something that we need to be really thoughtful about, and I would say any developer needs to be thoughtful about, is making sure that at any point in time, we need to be able to produce a lease for any unit that has all the right rents, all the right people on it, all the right, everything that kind of would that makes sure that we're fully compliant with local laws and regulations. That's actually not trivial to build. There's some real technology that goes behind that to do that at scale.
You got an investment from the Lefrak, Mack, and Milstein families, I believe.
Correct.
How did you get that done? I mean, you have no background in real estate. You're not a real estate guy. I don't know how well you know people in real estate circles, but how did you get these big names to invest with you?
Sure. Well, I think it's about seeing the housing need, and I think every single investor in Common sees the need for this product. You talk to, for someone in one of these families, like a Michael Milstein or a Harry Lefrak, you can talk to your peers and understand how they're living. They're living with roommates. And
so you just called Harry Lefrak out of the blue.
We were connected actually through one of my wife's friends.
Okay.
To the Lefrak organization, and through that I got to meet Harry, and it's really just about the housing need and seeing the need for this particular product, seeing how difficult it is for someone who's 25 years old, just to give an example, new to New York City, going onto Craigslist to try to find a place to live. That's a brutal experience.
Yep.
And people are willing to pay a little bit more to have a better experience.
So you've raised, I believe, a little more than $23 million from
Correct.
venture investors from those 3 families and others. How much pressure comes along with that? I mean, are you feeling a lot of pressure to expand very quickly because you have these venture investors that want to cash out at some point?
Well, one of the great things about partnering with real estate families, for instance, and family organizations, is that they have an incredibly long time horizon. They're families, they're multi-generational investors. And they look at this, and I look at this as really a generational play, as something that's going to take a very long time to play out fully. If I were just simply looking at this on a venture time horizon of like, this is 3 to 5 years, we're going to flip this thing, I wouldn't be able to have the kind of conversations with developers that I have that are talking about bringing us into projects that won't be delivered until 2021, until 2022. In some cases, we're talking about projects that are into 2025.
Your biggest competitor, arguably, is WeWork's WeLive co-living line. You've raised 23 million. They've raised, I don't even know what the latest is, 1.7 billion, 1.4 billion. How do you compete with a company that has so much money?
Well, for one, I don't look at this as a winner-take-all space. There's not just one hospitality brand. And I really look at this space as very analogous to the large hospitality brands. I have to say, we've never lost a real estate deal to a competitor, to another operator in the space. We've had many struggles with deals because a developer might have a concern, or their equity might have a concern, or their bank has a concern about what happens if Common goes out of business. Is there another operator that could take over the space, take over the building? And I, for one, kind of, would love to see WeLive turn into something really meaningful. I think that would make my life a lot easier.
But do you think that might change as co-living expands? Maybe, ideally, 5 years from now, you'll probably be running into competitors more often, right?
I hope so. I think it's a very deep market. I think, there was a study that came out a few years ago that showed that there are about 750,000 people in New York City alone living in some sort of shared home. And I think that's a hugely broad market. And so I think it'll be a very long time before, even if much larger capital players come in, that you even begin to really chip away at the depth of the roommate market.
Still, though, most people who live with roommates in New York City, at least in my experience, don't do it primarily for the community feel. They do it to save money. You guys actually charge quite a premium compared to the neighborhoods that you guys are in Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy.
On a per square foot basis, not necessarily on
right.
Compared to a studio, we're substantially less expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, if my choice was going into a common or just renting a room on Craigslist, usually Craigslist would be much, much cheaper. How much demand is there actually? How many people are there that want to pay a premium to live in a furnished managed apartment in an area like Crown Heights?
Well, we've certainly seen a lot, and one thing we've seen is that people are a little bit less prescriptive about neighborhood, about location. So people generally don't come to Common and say, hey, I want to live in Williamsburg, I want to live in Crown Heights, I want to live in Park Slope. They come to Common and say, hey, I'm moving to New York.
What percentage of your members is from outside of New York City or new to the city, roughly?
70% have never lived in New York before.
Oh, wow.
So it's a lot of people who are new to the city, and they're looking for something very convenient. And the community is this.
You've focused, and we've talked about this before, you focus on neighborhoods where the real estate prices aren't as expensive, right?
Correct.
You wouldn't do like Murray Hill, presumably.
Well, I'm not saying I'm religiously opposed to Murray Hill. I just think if you were to back out the price of a bedroom in Murray Hill, that would make an investor happy. It would be something like $3,500 a month, and I'm just not sure who you're going to rent a $3,500 bedroom to.
Right, that makes sense. But most of your buildings so far are in Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, areas like that. As you said, most of your customers or most of your members are new to the city. They at least have some money or enough money to spend to pay for a $1,900 a month room in Crown Heights. Are you aiding gentrification? Are you accelerating it?
Well, I think it's something we think a lot about, and I think you kind of have to unwind that and understand what are the contributing factors and what can we do to mitigate the impact we have. The first is we have very strict rules around only either doing ground up or going into buildings that are already unoccupied. We only look at buildings that are fully unoccupied, going through a gut renovation or ground up development. And that's a really strict rule that we stick to. The other is, I think, one of the more nefarious aspects of gentrification is displacement of local businesses. As newcomers come into a neighborhood and they say, you know what, I'm not going to go to the bodega, I'm going to go to just order my groceries on Fresh Direct. and then suddenly you have vacant storefronts. And we actively try to educate our members about the local businesses. We do events bringing those local businesses into our homes and helping our members understand what's in the neighborhood. But those are the neighborhoods, places, the places we go. We just go for the affordability, and I think that's why a lot of other people go to those neighborhoods. We have an affordable housing crisis in New York, and we're trying to, by increasing density, take people who otherwise would have taken studios and one-bedrooms and put them into a more dense environment, and therefore I think limit the impact of those newcomers on the housing market as a whole.
Speaking of density, how much of an obstacle is zoning and housing laws in New York City? I mean, single room occupancy, for example, is illegal. Is that a big obstacle for you guys?
Well, obviously you have to be careful about these things, and you have to engage with the city and understand, where making sure you're on the right side of the line. For us, we're a facilitator of roommates. Roommates are protected, and there are certain things we have to do to make sure that we are fully in compliance. An example of that is there are no locks on common bedroom doors, and that is a really important thing to not being classified as an SRO. And we have to educate all of our members about you have an interior privacy lock, but you don't have an exterior keyed lock. Everyone has to be okay with that going in. Okay. Obviously, the unit itself has a locked door, but the bedroom does not.
So you can lock it from the inside, not from the outside, basically.
Exactly.
Is that an issue for any of your members? Do people kind of block at
Sometimes
that?
we get questions about it, but our job is to make them comfortable with the other people they're sharing a suite with. After all, we're a facilitator of roommates. They're not renting a bedroom; they're renting a share of a unit with a combination of other people. Yep. So they have to be comfortable with those other people that they're renting with. So part of our biggest job is to make them familiar and make them comfortable with the other people that they're in there together with.
And I would imagine another challenge is you have to come up with some sort of management agreement structure.
Correct.
It's not as straightforward.
Leases don't work.
Right.
Leases don't work.
So how do you get around this?
Banks won't underwrite master leases. So we moved away from master leases kind of at the very beginning of Common and have been doing management agreements ever since. And there it's like we really had to come up with this from scratch. There was no template to do what we were trying to do. Because it's kind of like a property management agreement in residential. It has some elements of that. But it's kind of like a hotel flag operator agreement. And so we kind of looked at both of those and took some elements from one, took some elements from the other. Obviously, we've negotiated a number of these at this point. So the agreement has evolved over time to accommodate what a bank wants, what the developer wants, and ideally make everyone happy.
Yeah, and is there a profit sharing component usually?
Yeah, so the way it works is it's a percentage of gross revenue, like a traditional property manager would do. So say 4% of gross revenue, plus a share of what we call net operating income above threshold net operating income. So basically a share of whatever the building is doing that's better than what it would have done if it were traditional. So if the building would have produced $1 million in NOI a year as a traditional building, and as co-living it's producing $1.5 million a year of NOI, we're going to take a share of that $500,000. So the idea is that the developer is never going to do worse than they would have done had they just hired a traditional property manager, because we're just taking at that point we're just taking the same share that we would have. And then our job and their job is to keep construction costs down and to make sure they're not spending any more on the construction than they would have on had they built traditional units. And fortunately, co-living actually is pretty efficient to build because you're building fewer kitchens. And kitchens tend to be the most expensive thing in a residential construction project.
This is the crystal ball question, but how big can co-living get? I mean, is this always going to be a niche product for a small subset of 20-somethings in certain cities, or is it going to be a big part of the real estate market around the world where most apartment buildings at some point will be run by a common or by something similar?
So I think you have to, once again, I want to break that down into two questions. One is, these service apartments for roommates is kind of one definition of co-living. I do think there's a very deep market there of people who are today either, living in a studio, who would gladly take the choice to save money and get some of the conveniences that come with common, or people who are currently living in a bedroom they found on Craigslist and would have preferred the ease and simplicity and de-risking of taking a bedroom from moving into common. So I think that's a deep market, but I think the even bigger market is thinking about how the principles of what we call co-living can apply even beyond this specific use. So we've been thinking a lot about how would we better serve families, for instance. I have an 8-month-old son, and childcare in New York is incredibly challenging. And it seems like one of those areas where a shared housing product, admittedly laid out in a very different way, would make a lot of sense.
How would that work, co-living for families?
Well, clearly you would have to rethink what you're sharing and what you're not sharing. So, a private unit probably makes a lot more sense. But I would love to have shared play spaces. I would love to have a daycare in the building. Things like that would make my life immensely easier as a young parent. So we don't have anything to announce, but we're actively kind of thinking about this, and I do see Common partly as a think tank for cool things in residential.